But what we know is that we will end up with many more unemployed, and particularly also people in the gray economy, which are not counted for, who lose their jobs. So we will see definitively a lot of anger already now, but probably increased by the end of the year, because this crisis will be with us until we really have found a remedy. So we have to prepare for a more angry world. And how to prepare? It means to take the necessary action to create a fairer world.
So there are a lot of talks about World War III, how China is circling Taiwan. We have things escalating between Israel and Iran. Then we have Russia and Ukraine escalating. And then it feels like the United States is going to get involved, and these countries in NATO are going to get involved. Then we have North Korea making moves against South Korea, and we have Russia protecting North Korea. So it definitely seems like war is inevitable. This massive war is about to break out at any moment. On TV, it definitely appears like all these countries are at each other's throats. There's a great division, and upon this great division between these world leaders, then it falls on the public. The public believes that they have enemies in Russia. They believe they have enemies in China. They believe they have enemies in the United States, in Israel, Iran, and so forth. But in the background of it all these world leaders that are causing this division that is dividing the public are unified. They are united under the script writers known as the World Economic Forum and the powers that be. When you tell people this, they'll say, how can that be? Because the man on the TV box, he told me that Russia's doing this, the United States is doing that, countries in the United Nations is doing this, Israel and Iran are doing that. So how can this be that all these world leaders that I see that are divided on TV be united in the background? Well, that's simple. You just take a look at the people, the world leaders who attended the World Economic Forum, not once, not twice, but many, many times, giving very similar speeches about the future that sound very reminiscent to that 2030 agenda that the World Economic Forum and the United Nations are pushing. You will find that Putin himself has visited Davos, the World Economic Forum, many, many times. There are many photos of him giving speeches. Not only that, listen to this introduction by Klaus Schwab to Vladimir Putin, and you will hear how Vladimir Putin met Klaus Schwab back in the early 90s. And this is what prompted Putin to be the leader he is today.
Russia is an important global power, and there's a long-standing tradition of Russia's participation in the World Economic Forum. At this moment in history, where the world has a unique and short window of opportunity to move from an age of confrontation to an age of cooperation, the ability to hear your voice, the voice of the President of the Russian Federation, is essential. Even and especially in times characterized by differences, disputes and protests, constructive and honest dialogue to address our common challenges is better than isolation and polarization. Yesterday, your phone exchange with President Biden and the agreement to extend the New START nuclear arms treaty in principle, I think, is a very promising sign in this direction. COVID-19, Mr. President, has shown our global vulnerability and interconnectivity. And like any other country, Russia will certainly also be affected, and your economic development and prospects for international cooperation, of course, is of interest to all of us. Mr. President, we are keen to hear from your perspective and from that of Russia how you see the situation developing in the third decade of the 21st century and what should be done to ensure that people everywhere find peace and prosperity. Mr. President, the world is waiting to hear from you.
Спасибо. Уважаемый господин Шваб, уважаемый господин Шваб.
Mr. Schwab, dear colleagues, dear Klaus. I've visited Davos many times, assisting meetings starting from the 90s. Mr. Schwab just mentioned that we met each other first back in 1992 in St. Pete. And when I worked in St. Pete, I visited this forum many times. I'd like to thank you for this opportunity today for me to make my statement vis-a-vis the expert community which is participating in this forum, thanks to your efforts, Mr. Schwab. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome all world.
Then they went ahead and blocked the comment section of that video because I guess so many people were calling this out as BS, or so people don't call this out as BS, but you definitely cannot leave a comment on this video, and I wonder why. But it's not just Putin. Let's look at another major player of World War III, which would be China, Xi Jinping. Well, isn't it interesting that he has also given numerous speeches at the World Economic Forum, and one of his very first speeches 7 years ago was about defending globalization, how to introduce globalization across the world, which is essentially the 2030 agenda, that one world government.
Beautiful town in the Alps is indeed an important window through which we can take the pulse of the global economy. People from around the world come here to exchange ideas and insights which will broaden their vision. This makes the WEF annual meeting a cost-effective brainstorming event, which I would like to call Schwab Economics.
So let's go ahead and take a look at their supposed enemies, because before Zelensky donned that beard, the leader of Ukraine, he was seen multiple times at the World Economic Forum giving speeches. And his speech in 2020 sounds very similar to Putin's speech, to Xi Jinping's speech about globalization, this one world government. What he says sounds very reminiscent to what's on the 2030 Agenda website.
Thank you for what has already been done, and I count on the further fruitful cooperation. The topics which are debated here in Davos always focus on the state of the modern world and elucidate the challenges facing humanity. And this year, Forum united the leaders to discuss extremely important topic, the cohesive and sustainable world. Well, to my mind, frankly speaking, Ukraine has what to say in this regard. What is the biggest threat to cohesive and sustainable world today? And this is security issue. Well, security for an individual as well as for many countries and all nations. The present-day world is changing with reactive speed, which transferred us into a new epoch, the epoch of new normality. What yesterday seemed fantastic, today has become a reality. But unfortunately, not everything is positive by far in this epoch. Trade wars, the redistribution, division of territories, the hike of military budgets, separatist movements, cancellation by countries of the previous international treaties. This is also, unfortunately, a new normality, and this undermines the credibility and trust of the mankind and make you think, well, are we not going to the abyss? Is this world not going to the abyss? We risk that the forthcoming generation suffering from climate changes, permanent conflicts, poverty, the restricted access to food will upbraid and rebuke every world leader that they really had chance to agree but have never made use of the chance.
Act together and fast for the greater good. Now, Professor Klaus Schwab, founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, believes a global reset is possible, and he's published a book about just that. And he joins me now. Hello there to you. Many thanks for joining us on the Global Conversation. Now, when you look at the state of the world right now, what's the first word that springs to your mind?
The word reset, I think, is appropriate because we are now still fighting the virus, but we can be rather optimistic after what we have seen with the announcement of vaccines. Now we have to think how to structure, how to design the post-corona era. And here, of course, the word reset comes to my mind because one thing is clear. We cannot come back to the old normal. We have to use this opportunity as our parents and grandparents have done after the World War II to really reflect on what went wrong and what could we do better.
What is your priority?
Path. After World War II, we literally drew a line under centuries of conflict and took steps to bend the arc of history. It sounds like hyperbole, but we actually bent the arc of history in a more just and fair direction. Instead of resigning ourselves to ceaseless wars, we built institutions and alliances to advance our shared security. Instead of punishing former enemies, we invested billions and billions of dollars to help them rebuild. Instead of sorting the world into winners and losers, we outlined universal values that defined a better future for our children. Our careful, and I mean careful, attention to building and sustaining the liberal international world order with the United States and Europe at its core was the bedrock of the success the world enjoyed in the second half of the 20th century. An era of expanded liberty, unprecedented economic growth that lifted millions out of poverty, a community of democracies that to this day serves as a fulcrum for our common security and our capacity to address the world's most pressing problems. Strengthening these values, values that served our community of nations so well for so long, is paramount to retaining the position of leadership the Western nations enjoy and preserving the progress we've made together, and I would argue the health of the remainder of the world.
Legal people. I actually was on the phone with the president of, with the CEO of Pfizer, Albert Bourla. I think at 2 o'clock in the morning, he put his legal advisor on, I put our legal advisor on, and we crashed it. So you need personal leadership to move it. And basically the selling point was a real one, turns out to be true, that Israel could serve as a world laboratory for herd immunity or something approaching herd immunity very quickly. Because we have an efficient distribution system, we proved that with 4 HMOs that are at once competing and cooperating with.
Now, even Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, has his own webpage dedicated to him on the World Economic Forum. He even has a title, Chairman, State Affairs Commission. These world leaders, they are scripted to cause division because the end goal is order out of chaos, that great unity, that one world government, that great merger. This is why Klaus Schwab said we will live in a much angrier world, because this is the plan. It is all planned out to cause division, to cause an angry world, so they can usher in more control.